She said she was old enough to be my mother, but tonight, I realized she was young enough to be everything I wanted. The first time I met her, I couldn't stop noticing how the apartment reflected her, warm, orderly, and quietly confident. I had just moved in, boxes still scattered across the floor, and there she was, standing in the doorway with a set of keys in her hand, a faint smile playing on her lips. She was older than me, undeniably so, but it wasn't just her age that struck me, it was the poise with which she carried herself. She moved like someone who had seen a lot, felt a lot, and still remained grounded in the present. Her voice was calm, measured, with a soft undertone that drew me in despite myself. "I hope you'll take good care of the place," she said, handing me the keys. Her hand brushed mine for the briefest moment, and I felt a strange jolt, not unpleasant, just noticeable. She caught the fleeting look I gave her and tilted her head slightly, a knowing half-smile tugging at her lips. "And yes," she added lightly, "I'm old enough to be your mother." There was a teasing edge to it, not mean-spirited, but it made my chest tighten with a mix of surprise and curiosity. Her apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and coffee, the kind of homey scent that makes you pause and take it all in. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting a golden glow on her carefully arranged furniture. Everything about the space seemed lived in, yet intentionally curated, like a reflection of the woman herself, elegant, understated, and quietly magnetic. As she guided me through the apartment, I noticed little things, the way she tucked a stray hair behind her ear, the soft rhythm of her movements, the subtle confidence in how she opened cabinets or straightened a picture frame. I tried not to stare, but I found myself drawn to her gestures, the small details that hinted at a life fully lived. When our hands brushed again, handing over a form, adjusting a box, my pulse quickened more than I expected. There was an ease about her that made the age difference both undeniable and irrelevant. She laughed softly at one of my awkward jokes, and the sound lingered in the air, warm and melodic. I realized, in that moment, that this wasn't just a landlady-tenant interaction. There was a quiet tension in the room, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the air before a soft rain. And even though she teased me about the age gap, I couldn't stop thinking, she was someone I wanted to know, someone I wanted to linger around, long after the boxes were unpacked. After the first meeting, life in the apartment began to settle into an unexpected rhythm. Our interactions, initially brief and polite, started to stretch into lingering conversations. She would sometimes appear at my door with a cup of coffee, a knowing smile on her face, or a stray book she thought I might enjoy. And I, in turn, found myself looking forward to those small intrusions into my day, not just for the coffee or the book, but for the warmth of her presence. It was during these moments that I began to notice her in ways I hadn't before. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke about something she loved, a subtle crinkle at the corners that suggested laughter and life well lived. Her hands moved with precision and grace, whether she was holding a mug or flipping through pages, but occasionally, they would brush against mine, a light, accidental touch that sent a quiet thrill up my arm. Each touch was fleeting, yet it left a trace, a warmth that lingered long after. Her home itself became a backdrop to our growing connection. The soft amber glow of her living room lamp in the evening, the faint aroma of vanilla or brewed coffee, the textured fabric of the couch we often shared while discussing a book or a piece of music, all these small details became intimate markers of comfort and familiarity. It was a place where words flowed easily, and silences were never awkward. She didn't rush me to respond, and somehow, that patience made the moments between us feel heavier with meaning. We discovered shared tastes, often in quiet bursts of laughter or surprise. A favorite song playing on her stereo, a book she recommended that I had already read, these tiny coincidences sparked a sense of connection that felt deeper than casual acquaintance. And when she would sit nearby, her shoulder brushing mine, her hand occasionally resting on the couch just behind my back, I felt the tension between comfort and something more. It was in these subtle interactions that I realized the age difference, which she often teased me about, didn't feel like a barrier. Instead, it seemed to enhance our connection. Her experience, her calm, measured confidence, and the soft vulnerability she occasionally let slip were magnetic. I wanted to linger, to hear more of her stories, to feel the reassuring steadiness she exuded. By the end of each day, I found myself quietly anticipating the next encounter, a sense of warmth settling into my chest, and a longing to remain in her orbit, however small the moments might be. The quiet familiarity wasn't just comfort, it was the foundation of something that promised to grow, something neither of us could yet name. By now, our interactions had settled into a rhythm, but something unspoken hung in the air between us. Every encounter seemed charged, not with words, but with moments that lingered longer than necessary, a brush of hands while handing over a cup of tea, a shared glance that held a question neither of us dared to voice. The age difference, once an amusing remark, now felt like a delicate thread tying us together, fragile yet taut with possibility. One evening, she asked me to help her carry a box up from the storage room. Our shoulders brushed as we maneuvered around the narrow stairwell. My pulse quickened as I felt the warmth of her arm near mine, a subtle vibration of closeness I couldn't ignore. She laughed softly at my clumsy attempt to steady the box, and I caught the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, a moment of beauty that held me captive. It was a laugh, a movement, a softness in her gaze that spoke of something deeper than politeness. Cooking together became another quiet stage for these small yet electric interactions. She would hand me a utensil, our fingers meeting and lingering for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I found myself conscious of her presence, the faint scent of her perfume, the warmth radiating from her body as she leaned slightly closer to reach the stove. I could feel my own awareness sharpening, every gesture, every glance, every subtle shift of her weight seemed amplified. Our conversations grew more personal, but always with pauses that carried weight. When she spoke about her past, her voice softened, her hand occasionally brushing a strand of hair from her face. I noticed the tiny hesitations in her words, the subtle vulnerability she allowed me to witness. And though I longed to close the distance, I held back, respecting the unspoken boundaries between desire and propriety. The tension was as much internal as it was external, a quiet duel of restraint and longing. Sometimes, we would find ourselves sitting side by side on the couch, shoulders just touching. Neither of us moved away, but neither spoke of it either. I could feel the electricity of proximity, a steady, grounding warmth that coursed through me every time she shifted slightly closer. It was intoxicating, this unacknowledged desire, and yet it was tempered by respect and the awareness of the social gap between us. By the end of the week, the tension had become a language of its own. We no longer needed words to communicate the pull between us, a glance, a brush of hands, a sigh in the quiet of her apartment sufficed. Every encounter left me more aware of the magnetic, unspoken connection that was quietly weaving itself between us, a connection that was delicate, thrilling, and undeniably real. It happened on an ordinary evening, though nothing about that night would feel ordinary afterward. The apartment was quiet, the soft hum of the city outside blending with the faint aroma of tea she had brewed. We were sitting across from each other at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around her mug, and for the first time, I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. Something unspoken hovered between us, an invitation to step closer, emotionally, if not physically. She spoke then, almost tentatively, of a chapter of her life she rarely shared. A failed relationship, a dream she had once cherished and abandoned, a moment of regret she had tucked away. Her voice was calm but tinged with a vulnerability that made me lean in without thinking. She wasn't asking for comfort, but the way she spoke, the soft lowering of her gaze, the brief pauses between her words, drew me in, compelling me to respond. I reached out before I realized it, letting my hand hover for a heartbeat above hers, then resting it lightly on the back of her fingers. Her skin was warm, familiar yet electric in its intimacy. She looked up at me then, eyes meeting mine, and I felt the weight of that trust, fragile, raw, and profoundly moving. In that brief contact, I understood her need to be seen, really seen, and the unspoken permission she was offering me to be present. She shifted slightly closer, just enough that the warmth of her arm brushed mine. I noticed the softness of her hair as she tucked a loose strand behind her ear, the quiet sigh she let out as if unburdening herself even in a small way. The room, the tea, the faint scent of vanilla lingering from earlier, everything around us seemed to pause, emphasizing the intensity of the moment. And in that pause, a subtle closeness began to form, a bridge between us built not on words, but on trust and shared presence. I could sense her hesitation, her careful navigation between comfort and vulnerability, and it only made me more protective, more attuned to the nuances of her being. I responded with quiet attentiveness, letting my gaze linger on her features, my hand staying lightly over hers, offering a silent assurance that I was there. By the time the conversation ended, a new intimacy had been forged, one that went beyond fleeting touches or playful glances. It was emotional, deep, and irrevocable. She had let me in, and in doing so, had shifted the balance between us. I realized then that our connection was no longer merely circumstantial, it had begun to root itself in something enduring, built on trust, understanding, and a gentle yet undeniable pull that neither of us could ignore. The days that followed felt different. Our connection had shifted, subtle, undeniable, yet complicated. Every glance, every brush of hands, carried weight. Desire had entered the room, unspoken but palpable, threading itself through our interactions in ways that made my chest tighten with both anticipation and hesitation. I wanted to reach for her, to close the distance that had been carefully maintained, but I also knew the boundary we hadn't crossed was essential. It was a rainy evening when it struck me most vividly. She had asked me to help bring in some laundry from the balcony. As we navigated the narrow hallway, our shoulders brushed repeatedly. I could feel the warmth of her body, the faint perfume clinging to her hair, and every subtle touch left me acutely aware of the tension simmering between us. Her soft sigh as she reached for a damp sleeve was mirrored by the quickened beat of my heart. We laughed awkwardly, both recognizing the electricity in our proximity, neither wanting to acknowledge it outright. Cooking dinner together later only heightened the tension. She leaned over the counter to reach a spice jar, her hair falling in a loose cascade that brushed my arm. I found myself holding my breath, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't dare speak aloud. When I handed her a spoon, our fingers met briefly, lingering just a fraction too long. The warmth of her touch, the subtle pressure of her hand against mine, made my pulse spike. Desire was there, quiet, restrained, and magnetic. Yet, with every moment of closeness came hesitation. I was acutely aware of the age gap, the social expectations, and the silent rules neither of us had yet named. My mind wrestled with what it meant to feel this way about someone older, someone so much more experienced in life, and yet whose presence made my own world feel brighter, more alive. She, too, seemed to wrestle with her own uncertainty. Sometimes she would catch my gaze and look away with a soft smile, her lips pressing together as if to hold back words she wasn't ready to say. Even in quiet moments, sitting side by side on the couch, shoulder against shoulder, the conflict lingered. There was comfort in proximity, warmth in her nearness, yet an almost painful awareness of what we were both resisting. Every brush of her hand, every soft laugh, every subtle glance carried the unspoken question, would we allow ourselves to cross the line, or would we remain tethered by caution? By night's end, the desire had not diminished. It had only grown more acute, more tenderly torturous. Every touch, every pause, every unspoken thought layered tension atop tension, leaving both of us suspended between restraint and longing. It was a dangerous, exquisite balance, one that neither of us wanted to break, but both of us secretly yearned to explore. The night felt heavier than usual, as if the apartment itself was holding its breath. Rain tapped softly against the window, a gentle rhythm that matched the pulse in my chest. We had spent the evening talking, cooking, and occasionally brushing past each other in the kitchen, the air charged with the unspoken weight of what neither of us had dared to say. Tonight, though, there was a subtle shift, a quiet permission in the way she lingered near me, the way her gaze held mine a heartbeat too long. We ended up on the couch, as we often did, but this time, silence settled around us differently. I could feel her warmth radiating through the side of her body pressed gently against mine. Her hand brushed against mine almost by accident, lingering just enough for me to notice. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my hand rest over hers, feeling the steady warmth, the gentle pulse beneath her skin. It was intimate, grounding, and for a moment, the world outside the apartment ceased to exist. She shifted slightly, leaning her head against my shoulder, her breath soft and warm against my neck. The sensation was delicate, electric, and deeply comforting all at once. Her hair tickled my cheek, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something floral, understated, and undeniably her. Every nerve in my body was alert to her presence, yet I felt a quiet steadiness in the closeness, a silent reassurance that this was exactly where we were meant to be. We didn't speak immediately. There was no need. Our eyes met, lingering, communicating in ways words could not. I felt her fingers flex slightly against mine, a tentative motion that invited connection while still respecting the fragile tension between us. I traced the back of her hand with my thumb, a slow, deliberate gesture, and she let out a soft sigh, pressing a little closer. In that instant, desire, trust, and affection converged, forming a quiet, unshakable bond. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, sharing a thought, a feeling, a truth she had kept to herself. I responded in kind, letting honesty flow freely, allowing the vulnerability we had cultivated over weeks to bloom fully in that shared space. Our conversation ebbed and flowed, punctuated by laughter, gentle touches, and the occasional long pause where nothing needed to be said. By the end of the night, the tension that had been building between us was no longer a distant ache, it was a tangible, beautiful connection. Our closeness, our touches, our shared vulnerability had transformed into a silent affirmation, an acknowledgement that what we felt was real, profound, and worth embracing. We didn't need to rush, and we didn't need to define it yet. For now, being near each other, feeling each other's warmth and presence, was more than enough. It was the culmination of everything that had been building, a tender, slow-burn moment of emotional intimacy that neither of us would forget. Morning light filtered through the curtains, painting the apartment in soft golden hues. The quiet hum of the city outside felt distant, almost irrelevant, as if the world had momentarily paused for the two of us. We sat together at the small kitchen table, cups of coffee warming our hands, and I realized how comfortable it had become to exist in her presence. There was no rush, no tension, just the gentle rhythm of shared mornings, of quiet familiarity deepened by weeks of unspoken connection. She reached for her cup, fingers brushing mine ever so lightly, and I felt the same thrill of closeness that had been building from the first day I moved in. It wasn't urgent or desperate, it was steady, grounding, and profoundly intimate. She laughed softly at something I said, her eyes crinkling in a way that made me smile without realizing it. In those moments, the age gap that had once seemed so striking felt secondary, almost irrelevant. What mattered was the connection, the shared warmth, the unspoken understanding that we had found something rare and precious in each other. We moved through the morning slowly, sharing glances and small touches, a hand on a back as she passed by, a playful shoulder brush, the simple press of her hand against mine across the table. Each gesture carried meaning, tenderness, and a quiet affirmation of our bond. There was an ease now, a trust, a sense that the emotional groundwork we had laid over weeks had blossomed into something stable and enduring. Later, we found ourselves sitting side by side on the couch, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and the lingering vanilla scent she always seemed to carry. The world outside could wait. I traced patterns on the back of her hand with my thumb, feeling the warmth of her skin, the subtle pulse of her life intertwined with mine in that simple, unspoken intimacy. She teased me gently about the age difference, but this time it was affectionate rather than teasing in a distant or cautionary way. The humor, combined with the shared warmth of our connection, made me laugh, and I realized that the tension and uncertainty of the past weeks had transformed into comfort, desire, and belonging. As the morning unfolded, there was a quiet acknowledgement in our gestures, the gentle brush of hair from her face, a lingering hand squeeze, a soft glance that spoke volumes. We had crossed the threshold from tentative connection to something deeply real and mutually cherished. By the time the sun climbed higher, we were no longer simply landlady and tenant or a mismatched pair divided by years, we were companions, confidants, and something quietly, beautifully in love. The day closed not with a dramatic declaration but with a lingering embrace, a gentle hug, her cheek resting lightly against my chest, a moment that encapsulated everything, desire tempered by respect, passion softened by intimacy, and a love that had been slowly, deliberately nurtured into existence. If you loved this slow-burn romance and the tension between our unlikely pair, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. Comment below, would you take a chance on a love that defies the rules?